we're going.
All right, great. So thank you again, Connie. My name is Shannon Jarbo with Wetlands Watch, and this is Mary Carson Stiff, also with Wetlands Watch. As Connie said, we are both certified floodplain managers. And there is a reason that Wetlands Watch is so involved in flood insurance type things. We have recognized that the largest threat to wetlands in Virginia is sea level rise, so we have gotten very involved in sea level rise adaptation. And adaptation happens at the local level, and we have recognized that flood insurance and the community rating system are an opportunity to incentivize adaptation to sea level rise. So that's why we are so involved in it. Today we're going to start with an overview of the CRS program, and then we're going to talk briefly about a report that we are working on that will be finished next month that will help guide folks through the community rating system. And then we'll go over some specifics about the hazard mitigation planning process and how you can get credit within that process for under the community rating system. And we want to say that we'd like to encourage questions as we go. This is a complicated program. If you're not following something, please feel free to let us know. This is not going to work. Okay. So the community rating system is a voluntary program within the National Flood Insurance Program that offers discounts on flood insurance in exchange for good floodplain management within a community, within a locality. There are various activities that can be undertaken to improve floodplain management and earn that credit within the CRS, which we'll be talking about in more detail coming up. And it's administered by the community. I'm going to say community this whole time. I mean locality. I've just been working with the CRS too much. They use it interchangeably. It's the government division with local land use authority. So in Virginia, it's locality.
And I will say locality to confuse you all further. The goals of the CRS. So why was this program created through FEMA and through the National Flood Insurance Program? After certain big storms, there were a lot of payouts that needed to occur with very little money to do so. And so this program helps build up localities' floodplain management programs so there are less losses, and therefore the government has to pay out less in their in claims. So it was encouraged, or it was created to encourage the reduction of floodplain of losses to flood damage, and it was also created to encourage more localities to actually join the National Flood Insurance Program, which would bring more premium income into the program, which would allow them to pay out losses after large storms. This, of course, was an effort to make the program more solvent, as I already mentioned. It also encourages comprehensive approaches to floodplain management. This means management techniques that are not just structural, so it's not just building levees and flood walls in your community, but it's also using public outreach to educate citizens on what it means to make your home and your community more resilient to flooding and to flood damage, through the use of other tools in addition to structural management, such as regulatory power, and the use of land use planning, which of course is of special interest to Wetlands Watch.
So this is how the CRS actually works. So there are 10 classes. 10 is the worst, 1 is the best. It's important to keep that straight. It's easy to get that confused. There's a point system. You need a minimum of 500 points to move to the next class. And that is associated with a premium reduction. So these premium reductions you see along the right side there correspond with the different class ratings. And there's nothing in between. There's no like 7.5. It's either a 7 or an 8. These premium reductions are effective for policyholders in the special flood hazard area. So that's your highest risk flood zone, your A and B zones if you're looking at a flood insurance rate map from FEMA. A smaller discount applies to folks in low and moderate risk zones. So those folks who are in an X zone on FEMA's maps, they get a 5% discount or a 10% discount depending on what the class rating is. I think they get a 5 through a class 6 and then a 10% discount above that. There is a class of properties that do not get a discount, and those are known as PRP, or preferred risk policies. Those are for policyholders who are in a low-risk flood zone and they've never had a flood insurance claim on the structure. So I have a PRP policy, which means I could not get the CRS discount. The reason for that is that those rates are so low already, they're only a few $100s typically, that it doesn't really, the CRS discount doesn't really matter for those folks. The folks that it really matters for are the ones in the special flood hazard areas where their risk is highest and their cost is highest, and their cost is increasing because of recent reforms to the National Flood Insurance Program, which is causing rates in those high-risk zones to increase a bit more.
I have, I have those charts that you printed off, and I have them for the different areas. So as I go around, if you'll let me know if you're in Northampton County or Chincoteague or Wachapreague.
We also have Anancock, Saxis, Tangier.
Yep, I'm going to go around with 4 of them right now, but if you tell me a specific one that I don't have, I'll keep that in mind and run back and get it for you. So
and we'll also show those. We'll show, you can actually see how much money is saved in each community at each level of the CRS. Yeah.
So is this for existing construction, or could this also be like new construction? If you are foolish enough to build a house in an area of high flood, you can still get federal insurance.
Oh yes.
Why is that?
Yes. Why is that? That's a great question. Well, there are a few areas in the 80s, an act was passed by Congress to try to prevent further construction. So if there's a barrier island that has not been developed and it's designated in this coastal barrier resources system, you cannot get flood insurance if you're in one of those. But most areas were already so developed they couldn't do that. The reason that the flood insurance program started was because flood insurance costs from private companies were so high, and the federal government was paying out so much money after flood-specific disasters that they had to do something. They had to come up with some sort of mechanism that people would pay up front for it. So that's why, but one of the results is that it does kind of encourage coastal development and gives folks a safety net, which is an unintended consequence of the program, but it's well recognized that that is a problem with it. Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken, I think a lot of the floodplains have changed. I think, as a matter of fact, I think my house, for example, right now is in a floodplain, and come, when's it, March?
It depends on what locality you're in, but
When does Northampton go into effect, do we know?
March 2nd.
Oh, is that right?
They can use the maps now, but
Does that have to be an
Insurance
official
agents
doctrine or something that comes from the county?
well, the county, they're having a public hearing on the ordinance in
Right.
a couple weeks. The maps we've been able to use for permitting processes, but insurance agents won't recognize it until after that effective date,
right.
which is March 2nd.
Okay, no, and so where I'm going with this is, does this reflect the new version? And I would probably say yeah.
It reflects whatever is in effect at the time this is done. So
That would make sense, because we're only talking a couple of weeks away.
right. So it's an ongoing thing. It depends on when you actually update your rating, what is in effect at the time. It's based on what maps are in effect at the time. Most likely, your new maps will be in effect when any new changes are made. But there are so you're in Northampton. Is that what you said?
Well, actually, I'm here representing the town of Only.
Okay.
Now, Only does not touch either body of water. They're actually central up to
Right.
Route 13.
Right.
So, just for argument's sake, I would probably assume it to be very low risk.
Right. Right. Yes.
So this really wouldn't have much of an effect on the residents.
Right.
For argument's sake, I'm saying.
Right. If you do not have a lot of high-risk floodplain, which Only does not, the discount is not going to be huge. But that's a decision that you need to make within each of your localities as to whether this is worth it. The report that Mary Carson and I have been putting together is a guide to help local governments walk through the CRS program and see what they're already doing, and how to easily get credit for that, and if it is easy, if it's worth the time to get credit for it or not. And that will help you decide whether it's worth participating in the CRS program. There's one locality in the entire country that's rated as a class 1, and that's Roseville, California, and they are the only class 1 because they don't have a large special flood hazard area, and they don't I don't think they have any structures in it. So it's easier in that sort of situation to get to that level. So there are different communities that decide to do different things based on what's best for them.
So let's say we have a community that is, say, eligible to put this program into place. What kind of a, I guess you have to have a certain number of residences or structures jump on board, am I right?
No. Nope.
No.
So this is, and we'll explain it more as we go, this is something that the local government does. This is all about what the local government does. And there are some things that private property owners can do that help to earn points. But this is essentially a local government program that benefits your constituents.
Gotcha.
Everyone that has a flood insurance policy with the National Flood Insurance Program will benefit from it.
I got you.
Okay, except for those PRP, those.
And I understand that.
I mentioned. Okay, great. All right, so we will.
You're getting there. I'm getting
Great.
All right, so in addition to the reductions that Shannon pointed out on the chart, and just to give a little bit of an anecdote, we actually were at the general store up the street earlier, just a few minutes ago, and we're speaking with the gentleman who owns it about his flood insurance rates, and he actually showed us his current bill, and his CRS reduction, or the CRS reduction for the town of Chincoteague, which is a Watchbridge, excuse me, which is a 5% reduction, was at the bottom of his bill. So you can actually see it, and it says Community Rating System Discount.
Right. So you can see, every single policyholder can see on their policy how much money the community rating system is saving them within their locality, and that can be.
So what you're saying is whatever your local government sets up is going to be the benefit.
Yes,
exactly.
Whatever their policy is that they set up for their community.
Precisely.
The community,
Right.
not individuals, people making, everyone, the whole community doesn't have to raise their house.
Exactly. If the whole community raises their homes, that will get them points, and that will help, but it's mostly local government actions, local government decisions that earn this discount.
Yeah, private individual property owners cannot elect to join this program.
Right.
Your locality must be a participating member of the program. You can encourage your locality to join, but that's the extent of what local people can do. So the savings is very, very clear. This is from a study that was done in Florida. They found in Florida that every time a CRS rating increased by one class, that's the reduction of 5%, the average amount of flood damage in that Florida locality decreased by $303,000. So that's pretty big savings. They also found that actions that would be required to get that one class increase would protect a locality from about 2 inches of rain, so flooding from 2 inches of rain. For a city like Norfolk, Virginia, where I live, rainfall causes a lot of flooding problems, and so the stormwater drain backup is something that floods the street adjacent to my house. So this is something that is of real interest to a locality like Norfolk, and certainly for the locality in Florida.
These are the minimum requirements to participate in the CRS program. So there are minimum requirements. You have to have at least 500 credit points. So to start, you have to have 500. You've got to get to that class 9 to start. You have to have joined the NFIP program and have participated in the regular program for at least 1 year. That's important. The biggest key is that you have to be in full compliance with the minimum National Flood Insurance Program standards. FEMA is a stickler about this one. They really want to make sure that you've got the basics down before you take on something bigger like the CRS. And they are going to work with you and make sure that you know that. That means your ordinance has to be up to date. Everyone here should be all set because you're updating your maps, and you all know that you have to pass a new ordinance to adopt those maps. We have come across other localities that didn't know that, and their ordinance was well out of date. So that would need to be updated. And you also have to make sure you're enforcing the building standards that come with the NFIP. So there are several things that you need to make sure you are in that minimum compliance with the NFIP before you can take on the CRS. You have to maintain elevation certificates for new and substantially improved construction. This is probably the single most resource-intensive piece of the CRS. you have to, one, hold on to all of the elevation certificates, and you have to check them, all of them. You have to make sure they're correct. And we've heard that 90% of them get sent back to the surveyor to correct things. And so surveyors are starting to get more on board and doing them correctly so that they stop having to correct their work on the back end. But this is really, really important. 90% of the elevation certificates that are checked have to be correct, or you can't participate in the CRS program. So having those on file and having them correct is very important. And you can get some more credit if you've kept them from before you joined the CRS, but you absolutely have to keep them for new construction and substantial.
So your community has to keep these certificates?
Correct,
It's
yes.
not a personal policy only?
Right.
It's
Nope.
the
Building official
It's the
or
building-
whoever
It's
your
the
It's the
local
local
government
government.
charge has to have all these certificates.
Yes. For nearly everything we're talking about, it's not individuals. It's the community has to do it. You have to meet certain repetitive loss criteria. This is going to come up a lot today, and we are going to go into it in more detail later. But there's some information gathering, there's outreach, there's a mitigation plan, and there's mapping. They're required for some communities, and we will go into what communities, what things are required of which communities in a few minutes. And this is typically part of the hazard mitigation plan. You don't have to do it as part of the hazard mitigation plan, but most communities do choose to do that. So that's why we really want to talk about this, because it is required for a lot of communities and it can be part of your hazard mitigation plan process. You have to have flood insurance for any locality-owned properties that are in the special flood hazard area that are required to carry flood insurance. So if there is a federally backed mortgage on a structure, it's required to have flood insurance if it's in the special flood hazard area. So if there are requirements on a structure in the special flood hazard area on something that is owned by the community, you'll just have to keep that flood insurance. Some people try to slip through the cracks, and even if they're required, they might not pay. You cannot do that if you're going to be part of the CRS. Finally, you have to show the limit of moderate wave action line on the new flood insurance rate maps. So I assume several of you have seen the new flood insurance rate maps, and you have seen this limb wall line on it. This shows where there's an expected 1.5 to 3 foot wave action in the A zone, one of the higher risk flood zones. And this just shows where the risk is higher than originally thought. So you only have to agree to show it on the map. You do not have to regulate to it. If you do regulate to it, you get points for that. But you just have to show it. So you just have to make sure your citizens can see that there is a higher risk than they originally thought if they were in that A zone.
All right, so if your locality decides that it is going to join the CRS program, it will quickly learn, whoever is in charge of the program will quickly learn that there is a Bible associated with this program. This is called the Coordinator's Manual.
It's huge.
It's huge. It provides all the information on what is required to receive credits for various different activities that we will talk about, in wide-ranging areas of floodplain management. It has recently been updated. It's effective until 2016. It will be revised in 2016 again. 17. It'll be a pretty simple revision. It won't be a large overhaul like it was in 2013, where it became much more specific. They worked out a couple of the kinks. It is still a very, very dense, very difficult document, and it's very confusing. And so we have quite a lot of feedback for FEMA on ways to improve the manual, and it has really kind of inspired our review and our report that we're going to talk about later. Because it is so difficult, we wanted to provide local governments with a tool that will allow them to walk through the manual in a better informed or clarified way, just because we live in the weeds of it and we know that it's really, it's a really difficult document to put together. In addition to the manual, information that is also considered to be, very important to the CRS program for your locality official staff member that's actually working on the program. The website that every local government staff member who is working on the program should visit for additional information that is a supplement to the manual is crsresources.org. This is a FEMA-run website, even though it has the .org ending to it. It is still FEMA approved, and there are updates to the manual, supplemental handouts, supplemental guidance that tries to clarify things in the manual that might not be very clear. For example, they've decided that they're going to credit Facebook posts, and this is something that they did not note in the manual, so that's something that is in a public outreach guidance clarification document. So we strongly recommend everybody to use the website in addition to the manual.
And this is where, if you don't have a hard copy of the manual, you can download it from this website.
Yep. PDFs are free online. Yes, sir.
Okay, so I have another question. I'm a little confused. You talk about localities and communities. I'm trying to figure out what constitutes a locality. So I could understand that Northampton County could be a locality. I could understand, say, something like Exmoor, which is an incorporated village or incorporated town, could in theory be a locality. What happens if you are, say, in a hamlet or a village?
Also a locality.
It depends on
But we
local
don't
land
have
use authority.
A government, I mean, our government is Northampton County.
Your locality would be the county.
Yeah.
Right.
And then the question is, right, so then my question is, how does, say, the village of Willis Wolf or the village of Oyster do something, or does it have to be what the county is doing over the entire breadth of the county, or can the county say, we are gonna put you into this CRS system for this little village to try to get some relief for the people who are living right on this waterfront?
If the county does it, then everyone that the county has jurisdiction over is in the program.
Right, so in other words, they would have to do it for the entire county, they couldn't do it for a individual
It depends. If the hamlet or the village had ordinances and had a governance structure, then that.
Which we don't, because we're not allowed to.
Right.
So
So
then the
then
county
Not
for you,
It's
the
up to-
county would be the administrator or the locality or the community. In Virginia, we love complicating local government. We are unlike most states. We allow it all. So it is confusing, but you refer to whoever enforces the laws and the regulations and the ordinances in your community. Yeah, good question.
Okay, this is a note about how the CRS actually operates. It is actually operated by a company called Insurance Services Office, called ISO. It operates the CRS on behalf of FEMA. So FEMA doesn't actually operate the CRS. They are involved in it, but they don't operate it. There are 16 community specialists, so 16 folks that actually work with the localities. They grant the majority of the credit. They're the ones reviewing your programs. They're the ones deciding what qualifies for credit and how much credit you're actually going to get. And they meet with communities about every few years. Each specialist has about 100 communities. This is something that I found out in the summer that shocked me. It seemed like there's so much work to be done for each community. I was very surprised that each one had so many, but they do. And the CRS is so popular and gaining so much more popularity as a result of the recent reforms to the NFIP that they are having to hire additional specialists. And there is a new Virginia specialist. The former Virginia specialist has recently retired, so Christina Groves is the new ISO representative for the state of Virginia, so she will handle all the CRS communities within the state of Virginia.
And her office, just to give some perspective,
Yes.
is in the Midwest. So these people are working on our localities here in Virginia from all over the U.S. So don't think that they're up in Richmond, because they're not.
Right. And she also works with Kentucky, Tennessee, and Nebraska, I think. So she has, again, each specialist has 100 communities, so they work with multiple states. And she is new to Virginia, so she will be working on getting to know Virginia. But she's been great. There are 5 program coordinators that are a little more specialized. So for example, they have a specialist engineer that deals with stormwater. So if the community specialist can't quite figure something out how a community does something, they'll send it to these program coordinators and they figure out if it should be creditable and how many points it should get. So they all work together to figure this out. There are also several consultants that work with ISO on the CRS. So all the specialists, the program coordinators, the consultants, and FEMA all work together to operate the CRS, but the people that the local government will be dealing with is primarily ISO.
All right, so once you join the CRS and you are an active participant, what do you get credit for? So what are we talking about? You get credit for activities and policies that your local jurisdiction implements, enforces, encourages in your communities. So there are, you can see the bolded activities are kind of like the umbrella activities. It's good to think about what your local government does in chunks and in sections in related categories, because there are so many sub-elements and sub-activities within the CRS program that you can get credit for. So we just broke them out very basically for everybody to understand. The public information activity category has a ton of different specific outreach activities that are creditable. So this includes sending postcards to individuals that live in a flood hazard area. It includes incorporating public outreach and public participation in your hazard disclosure and in your hazard mitigation plans, which we'll talk about later today. The second category is mapping and regulations. So this is quite literally mapping. Your locality might have a GIS program that allows people to log on online and check out their parcel and see where it is in relation to other parcels and to find out additional information through the GIS layers. And then regulations, of course, what does your locality actually require as far as open space goes, stormwater management? I mean, there are a lot of things that the local governments regulate on a daily basis that they can get credit for through the CRS. Flood damage reduction. This is, these are activities that range from structural to non-structural. So things like acquiring and relocating properties, maybe in the floodplain, that's a way to get credit for locality. Other forms of mitigation, this is structural mitigation, like actually creating levees and flood walls and mitigation through natural functions, creating open space corridors for stormwater to flow freely. And then floodplain management planning. This is very comprehensive. It involves a lot of different things that your locality might do to keep and manage the floodplains, keep them clear and free for water to flow and to reduce flooding. And then finally, warning and response. What kind of actions does your locality do to make sure people know about flooding when it's going to happen, so people know what to do after flooding and a flooding event might occur? This also does include structural things like dams and levees. What happens in a dam inundation zone, that has certain implications on how the public and how your locality will choose to deal with flooding and the risk of flooding. So again, keep in mind that these are kind of our overall, overarching categories within which there are many activities.
So these are some specific examples of activities that you can do as a local government that will earn CRS credit. So preserving open land in the floodplain. You don't have to have regulation about preserving open land, just however many parcels of open land that are dedicated open space where you prohibit development on them, and as long as they're located in that floodplain, you can get credit for those. Having and enforcing statewide building codes. So we of course have a statewide building code, so as long as you enforce that, you can get credit for that. Adding a freeboard provision to your ordinance. That can get enough points to bump you up an entire class rating. That's a really big one. Open space is a really big one as well. Low density zoning. If you have low density zoning, you can get credit for that. letters to property owners in flood-prone areas. So if you send letters saying you are in a flood-prone area, saying you should get flood insurance, maybe offering tips for how you could mitigate, such as elevation, you can get credit for that. Retrofitting flood-prone buildings. So this is elevating buildings. So this is really the one thing that individuals can do to help earn credit in the CRS program. If an individual mitigates their own structure, so if they elevate it or put in flood vents, there are several different ways they can mitigate it, then each structure that has been mitigated can earn credit for the CRS, but it's up to the community to actually track who is doing the mitigating. So that might be something you might want to put into your building permit process, just a checkbox to see if they're mitigating for flood reasons. As MC mentioned earlier, removing flood-prone buildings from the floodplain, so acquiring and relocating or just demolishing buildings and not rebuilding, or even demolishing a flood-prone building and rebuilding more safely, that can earn you credit. Having and enforcing stormwater management regulations, so of course we do have statewide stormwater management regulations, so as long as you can prove that you are enforcing those, there is some credit available for those, and maintaining drainage systems, you can get credit for that as well. And there are several other activities you can get credit for.
All right, so what's the state doing? What is Virginia doing in the CRS program? So you can see that this chart, and I know it's kind of hard to see, if you'll note, blue is what Virginia's average credit is. Red is what the national average credit is. So you'll see, that not all categories are relevant. So you can see on the far right how there are three, thanks Shannon. Those three don't really matter because there aren't a lot of, for example, there aren't a lot of levies in Virginia, and so we're not going to perform well as compared to the rest of the nation because it's just not something that we really do here in Virginia. So don't let that be a discouragement. So if you compare Virginia's average credit, for example, in 510, which is hazard mitigation planning, which is something we're going to talk about today, you can see that Virginia is doing better than the national average. So there's some areas where Virginia really has stepped up, and we have some communities that are doing very well in CRS. Our highest rated community is it Fairfax or Alexandria?
Alexandria.
Yeah, and they are at 5.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Alexandria's at a 5, so they're getting significant reductions for their locality constituents. And so 450 or 440 is another activity. This is basically mapping data. So Virginia has really been pushing to get new LiDAR data, which is just basically high definition mapping information. So elevation information. So what is the elevation of the properties located in your local government? That has pushed us above the national average as far as what communities are getting credit for.
This is a map showing the current communities that participate in the CRS in the state of Virginia. This is from 2012, so it is a little bit outdated. Since this publishing, the city of Chesapeake has joined. I'm not sure if any others have joined, but I know that Chesapeake has joined. So the green shows those communities that are participating. I don't know if you can tell the different color stars. I guess you can. The green stars, well, the stars indicate the localities that have the highest number of NFIP policies in the state. The green stars show the communities that participate in the CRS and are among those highest NFIP policies in the state. And the red show those that have the highest numbers in the state but are not participating in the CRS. So you'll see that Northampton is one of those that would really benefit because there are so many folks that do have NFIP policies in Northampton, but they currently do not participate in the CRS. And down here you can see in the state overall there are over 55,000 NFIP policies in the state. Those policyholders pay over $38 million in NFIP premiums annually. And the CRS savings in the state of Virginia are over $2.8 million. So for those communities that do participate in the CRS, that saves Virginians over $2.8 million in flood insurance premiums. Here's some more information about Virginia and the CRS. So there are 23 communities that participate. On the eastern shore, we have Accomack, Cape Charles, and Wachapreague that do participate. A new applicant right now is the City of Richmond. They are in the application process. Class 5 is City of Alexandria, although now Mary Carson mentioned Fairfax before, and it may be Fairfax, not Alexandria.
They're dueling for higher credit. Their floodplain managers actually have a bit of a wager going on, and so it's kind of fun. They're getting competitive with it. You know, we love it, but anyway.
At any rate, Class 5 is the highest in Virginia, and it is attainable in Virginia.
Alexandria, sorry to interrupt, Alexandria has a ton of floodplain. I mean, their whole
Yeah.
historic district is floodplain. So they've worked really hard to get that 5, and I know that they're a large city and they have a lot of money, but they, you know, it's really attainable. So
Right.
we look to them in Portsmouth and in Norfolk.
So even on the Eastern Shore, could that be attainable?
It could
Yes,
be,
ma'am.
yes. It absolutely could be. And we'll show you some more information on that, yes.
Are these, is this automatically shown on an individual insurance premiums?
Yes, it
Or do
is.
you have to apply for it?
It's on your bill.
It's on your bill.
I was saying earlier, we met a gentleman from Watch and Break here today, and we saw his bill, and at the bottom, where all the totals come in, there's a line that says Community Rating System Discount, parentheses, 5%. And so
That would
he
be
is saving $75.
Accomack County also, right?
Correct?
Yes, sir.
Yep.
Thank you.
Chincoteague's also a participating community. You can add
Oh
that
my
to your
gosh,
list.
sorry, I knew that.
You
I am
were.
so sorry, Bill.
Unless you said something I don't.
Goodness, no. You're right. I am very sorry about that. We'll correct that.
What is Chincoteague rated?
We're
8 or
an
9?
8.
8.
So in Chincoteague's flood insurance policy would show that community rating discount, and it would show 10%. So it would show whatever 10% of the bill is would be the discount that they're getting.
So your constituents can see it in their bill. That's why people are so interested, and that's why the CRS has grown so much, because it's a direct benefit to your constituents, and they are interested. Yeah, Charles?
I'd also like to note that it's getting a lot of traction in the General Assembly. There was a bill that was proposed, but just got shot down, trying to basically make it part of the Hampton Roads Planning District Commission's hazard mitigation plan to try and work with all the communities to make it part of. So I mean, basically, all communities in Hampton Roads DC participate in it. So it's getting a lot more support at that level too. So.
Yeah, that's good. And Charles, for folks that don't know, Charles Klein is with the Department of Conservation and Recreation. I meant to recognize him earlier, so he is also available for questions.
So just out of curiosity, since you say Cape Charles is in this, do we know what they are?
Yes, we do, and I will show you that in just a couple minutes.
Oh, okay, good.
All right, we've already gone over this one. Okay, uniform minimum credit. So this is something that every state has. There's a certain amount of credit that the state actually earns for localities by requiring certain regulations or standards. So in Virginia, the building code earns credit, the stormwater management regulations earn credit, erosion and sediment control regulations earn credit, water quality regulations earn credit, and local drainage protection, which is associated with the building code, earns credit. The amount of credit that you actually get really varies because you have to be able to prove that you are enforcing everything properly. So they're going to look at your permits to see if you are enforcing things. And there are some adjustments to points that can get confusing. So for example, stormwater, something called an impact adjustment on stormwater, you get an amount of credit based on the size or the percentage of the watershed within your locality that you're regulating. So if there's a large amount of the watershed that's not within your locality and it doesn't have the same regulations on it, then you can't get a lot of credit. That gets really confusing. So the credit varies depending on how much you're actually doing in your locality. But every locality in Virginia should get a minimum of 131 points as long as they can prove that they are enforcing the building code, enforcing erosion and sediment control, enforcing the stormwater regulations, all of those things that I mentioned. And part of our report is actually trying to improve the uniform minimum credit for the state of Virginia, and that is being reviewed right now. We did get stormwater management regulations added to the uniform minimum credit, but they're currently reviewing a few other things. Yeah.
Don't take my question wrong, but in looking at the fourth bullet point, I'm really enthused about that. I'm impressed about it, I should say, more than anything else. But let me ask you. So we saved policyholders $3 million in premiums for 2013. We're talking 55,000 policyholders. For argument's sake, that savings is based on mitigation. A mitigation program.
Right.
Okay. Did the mitigation programs actually have that significant impact on what would be for remediation? Do you know where I'm coming from?
Yeah, I think that your point is certainly well taken. The CRS really cares about eliminating flooding and flood damage.
I have to believe that.
Yeah, that's really mostly what all they care about, arguably. They want every program to have a strong, every locality to have a strong floodplain management program. Now, some localities might be built out, and so mitigation might be their only tool because they might be depending on certain tax bases for their city to continue to exist and to fund all of its programs. And then there's some localities that might do better with focusing on remediation, as you say, so more management maybe. But I think that it's locality specific, and it's important to note that the CRS does reward localities for not just mitigating. They reward localities for doing more than that, for preparing for more than that.
For policies like freeboard I mentioned. So freeboard is requiring structures to be built a certain level above the base flood elevation, so the expected level of flooding. You can get a lot of credit for requiring that kind of freeboard.
I did it with my house. I thought it was a good idea. The reason I'm asking is because I was very heavily involved with Hurricane Floyd back in, I think it was 99, and it happened to be in Bergen County, New Jersey, okay? And it's just wall-to-wall asphalt concrete. Water has no place to go, i.e. Norfolk.
Right.
So you have to ask yourself, the savings is nice, and we're going to mitigate, but to really have an impact so that the damage when something comes along, because I dealt with the damage.
Right.
I mean, it was we had 8-digit numbers going across the board, and the premium savings is nice, but I don't know, is it going to really offset that much when it hits the fan?
Well, that piece of the CRS program has actually not been well studied. It's something that is being studied more now, but the point of the CRS was to encourage more localities to join the National Flood Insurance Program because they needed more premium coming in. It was created in the early 90s, so it's been around for a while now, and so now they're starting to see how things are changing. So the manual was overhauled in 2013, partially in response to recognizing things are not working exactly the way they wanted them to, and they will continue to update it. And they do recognize that there may not be a perfect correlation, and there will be some localities that reach a point. They can't, if they're completely built out and they have a freeboard ordinance and they've mitigated a lot and they've done everything they can, they don't have any open space to preserve, they are going to reach a point that they can't go any further in the CRS program.
Okay.
That is a possibility. So it's going to be dealt with differently in each locality, and that relationship is being further studied. But the basics of it are just assumed.
I wasn't trying to trip you up or
Oh
anything.
no.
That's fine.
Well,
It's a good question.
You talk about open space, and open space is one of the highest credited activities.
Believe
It
me.
is
And
the
so-
highest
It should
credited
be.
activity.
Yeah, so yes, mitigation, but also the idea of letting your floodplains and your high-risk areas revert to nature is a huge component of the program.
And
because
that's
it's just safe.
right. And that's one
That's
of
right.
the primary reasons that Wetlands Watch is so involved in the CRS stuff, is because open space and protecting floodplains gets so much credit. So that's wetlands too that are protected.
Right.
So,
Peter, you can-
all right. So we talked about Virginia, the state of Virginia. We're doing pretty well compared to other states. So what's happening here on the Eastern Shore? This is a map of the special flood hazard areas on the Eastern Shore. This is based on the older maps, so it's not including.
So the ones in effect right now, not the ones that are going to go into effect in
Yeah.
March.
Right. And so actually the impact on these in March, we're adding a little bit more in the special flood hazard area on the bay side than we are on the ocean side. So things will change a little bit, but I just wanted to note, obviously one of the best things about living on the Eastern Shore are these wonderful barrier islands, and you can see that this area in between, we all know that it's water because we know where we live, but this is not counting towards your special flood hazard area. And that's important to know because so much of the credit calculation is based on the area of the floodplain. And so all this water would be subtracted out. It's just easier for mapping purposes to include it, but of course that's not really floodplain, it's open water. And so this is kind of the state of affairs right now, and this is of course the 100-year floodplain. All right, so we're going to talk about the Virginia policies. This is more about credit savings. This is a comparison of the community, the number of policies that are within the NFIP for each locality, the average NFIP premium for the localities, or the total premiums for each locality, and then the CRS discount that is applied for each locality. So localities as small as Bridgewater with 60 policies are still seeing a reduction. It's small, but it's still, they're still getting a reduction.
And they've chosen to participate, even though they don't have that many policyholders. They've made the decision that it's worth it for them to participate.
Vienna, Virginia, has the lowest CRS discount in Virginia with $4,418, and then the city of Norfolk, not surprising, it's very at risk, and so Norfolk has the highest number of policies in the CRS program at 12,284, and their discount, total CRS discount, is $366, $153, excuse me, and they are at a 9 or an 8 or 9 in Norfolk. So they really are lower on the rating scale for Virginia, and so.
But they have the biggest savings.
Right. Still. So.
Hampton.
Sorry. Go ahead.
Hampton's got more savings.
Did we mess up again?
Where's Hampton?
Oh goodness.
2 up.
Oh, we really messed up. That was my fault.
700.
Again.
Yeah, but it's not percentage-wise.
No.
Right.
No, it's not.
Yeah, they have fewer policies, and their premiums are. It looks like their premiums are higher.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
Well.
thanks,
our
Tom.
error.
Yes. Sorry, twice. All right. We'll hope we don't go to a third error. Good point in pointing that out. So Hampton actually has the highest savings to their policyholders, not Norfolk. Even though, so what we wanted to point out is, and that actually helps reinforce, is you may not have the highest number of policyholders, but based on where your policyholders are located. So Hampton actually probably has more policyholders in the special flood hazard area with higher flood insurance costs, so their savings are higher. That's what we were trying to point out here. And a lot of localities in Hampton Roads are really trying to improve their CRS ratings because everyone is feeling the pinch of these NFIP rate reforms.
And so there you can see the total that was calculated, and Shannon shared that, but in Virginia, total savings of $2.8 million per year.
Okay, so these, Connie mentioned these earlier. She has these for several localities. These are called what-if scenarios, and I have to thank Charles for sharing these with me. So each what-if scenario shows the current CRS class, and it shows the total policies in force. That's what PIF means up at the top here. The total premium cost and the average premium. And then it also shows what the savings would be at each class of the CRS. And we're going to go through, we have 8 of these, so we're going to go through these for several localities. So you'll see Accomack is currently a class 8, which means there's an average savings per policy of $102, but that's just average. So every policyholder, the discount is calculated on every individual policy. So that's average. If they have a lot higher policy cost, then the average, their savings are going to be a lot higher. I also wanted to point out, I think that a class 5 is the most realistically attainable class, because once you go beyond a class 5, there's a lot more that you have to do, and there are only about 10 communities in the country that have achieved a 4 or better. So class 5 is the most realistic to attain, and if Accomack did become a class 5, they would have an average of $254 in savings per policy, and they'd save almost $660,000 throughout the whole community. Something else to note, this will become more obvious with some other localities, but this column shows the number of policies in the special flood hazard area, and this one shows those outside of the special flood hazard area, so in the lower and moderate risk zones. And this column is those PRP policies that I mentioned that don't get any discount. But keep an eye on those in a couple of the communities coming up. You can see how savings vary depending on where your policyholders are located. So this is for Cape Charles. Cape Charles is a class 9. You can see the current savings is about $65 per policy, but they could achieve about $320 savings per policy. And that would be, okay, keep going. Chincoteague, look, I did include Chincoteague here. Chincoteague is a class 8, which is currently about $131 average per policy. If they move to a class 5, they could reach about $327 savings per policy on average.
This is also interesting because all of the policies are in the special
Yes,
flood
it is.
hazard area.
What was that again?
All of the policies are in the special flood hazard area, so you notice there are no policies in the X zone.
Gotcha.
In Northampton. So Northampton does not participate in the CRS, so that's why they're a class 10. This is somewhere where there is a big difference between the total number of policies and the special flood hazard area policies. That means there are not a ton of special flood hazard area policies, but those folks are really going to benefit from the CRS. So you'll see the average rating or the average savings. If Northampton joined at a class 9, the average savings would be $37 per policy, but you see for those folks in the SFHA, it's an average of $51 per policy. And we move down here, 177 versus 254. So the savings are a lot higher in those high-risk special flood hazard areas because their rates are a lot higher. So it's the folks in the special flood hazard areas that really benefit from the CRS.
I've got a question.
Yep.
So if you raise your house, but your community doesn't have a good CRS rating, that's effective on your flood insurance?
That is effective on your flood insurance, yes. That will decrease your individual premium cost.
What I'm saying is you're not getting the full benefit because your community's not participating in that CRS, so you're not getting that.
Right. You would get an additional benefit if your community did participate, yes. And if you raised your house and your community participated in the CRS, they can earn credit because you raised your house. So that really helps if that type of mitigation really helps. In Onancock does not participate. This is a really big difference between the average and the special flood hazard area. So there are only 3 policies in the special flood hazard area out of the 23 in Onancock. But you can see the savings difference at each class level here. If you look at the class 5, the average is $63 per policy, but those in the special flood hazard area would be saving an average of almost $500. And you'll see those differences are pretty significant, yeah.
So to play the devil's advocate in this, let's say I lived in the town of Onancock, but I lived up on a hill and I'm not in the flood zone area. Why would I want my taxes potentially to go up for my county to meet the requirements of this so that 3 people who are foolish enough to buy waterfront property benefit?
That is a great question. There are a couple of answers to that. One is that by participating in the CRS program, your mitigation, your preparation, your resilience is better. So if you spend money up front, you are saving 4 times that on the backside for recovery costs. So if Onancock gets hit by a storm and the city or the town has to pay for cleanup after that storm, that's coming out of your taxes, and that's going to cost you more than participating in this program will cost you. Another answer is this is a decision that a NANCOC has to make. If there are only 3 policyholders that are really going to gain that benefit, and there aren't a lot of things that they're already doing that can earn credit, and it's going to be a big resource drain for them, then they'll make the decision that it's not the best thing for them to do. But what we are trying to do with the report that we're releasing is guide local governments through this CRS program so that it's really easy for them to figure out how to make use of what they're already doing and get that credit to make it as easy as possible.
And another thing to add, just because your house might be on a hill doesn't mean that it's actually safe from flooding. It just means that you're outside of what FEMA has deemed to be a dangerous zone or a high-risk zone. So you can see actually in a NANCOC the preferred policies. So those are folks like actually me and Shannon. We both have an elective policy on our properties. People in a NANCOC are doing a pretty good job, I think. It's pretty smart that 20 people don't have to have it, but yet they've elected to have flood insurance. So there's a culture of knowledge, it seems like, in a NANCOC about what the risks might be. So just not being in the SFHA doesn't mean you're safe, is what I would say to people.
And as soon as you do have a flood claim, then you will no longer be a PRP policy, and then you are going to start benefiting from that discount. Charles?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that a third of the total number of claims, not dollar value, the total number of claims, a third of them occur actually outside of the SFHA. They're in the X zone, the low risk identified zones. So there's still, there's still a good reason to have it if you are outside of the area. There's still a good reason to prepare for a flood event. Mitigate and have insurance.
Right. Okay, so for Saxis is not participating right now, but you can see pretty much all of their policy holders are in the SFHA, so there's not a big difference between the total and the SFHA. You can see what they would be saving. Let's move on. Then Tangier could be saving. This is how much based on their policy holders and average costs. And again, Connie has these tables, so if you want to take them with you, she has some printouts. She also has them digitally, and if your locality was not, we also have Watch Creek, thank you. So Class 9, Watch Creek is a CRS Class 9. Currently, average of $61 savings per policy. Could get up to $305 average per policy if they move to a Class 5. If your locality was not listed here, Charles will look into whether there is a scenario available for you. If you don't have any NFIP policies in your locality, or if they're all preferred risk policies, then this table really won't tell you much, but Charles can let you know that information.
And the tables are all back here.
Great.
On the back side.
Thank you.
All right, so for CRS Resources, all right, so your locality is already in the CRS. Where can they learn more? This is something that we like to always share because there are a lot of people who are interested, obviously, so there's a lot of additional information and resources that are at your fingertips, and we, of course, want everybody to be aware of the community of practice that's emerging with the CRS in Virginia. Web training, as we mentioned, the CRSresources.org website is the place to go. It's secondary to the Bible of the manual. You can attend webinars. There are a lot of handouts, as I mentioned, online materials, resources, contact information, etc. FEMA has an Emergency Management Institute that's in Emmitsburg, Maryland. They provide training. I'm attending a training on the CRS that Shannon has already attended in April, and local government officials, staffs can go and take the training, and it's actually very highly subsidized. FEMA will pay for your travel up to Virginia's minimum, which is $200. And then all you have to do is pay for a meal ticket, and they will provide room and board for you. So, 4-day class where you just learn nothing but this stuff, and they give you a copy of the wonderful manual, which will save you a lot of printing costs, I can tell you. We also have created, as I mentioned, a community of practice called the Coastal Virginia CRS Working Group. This is something that Shannon has been very intimately involved in, and I'll be taking over at some point. And this is where members of localities in coastal Virginia are coming together once every 2 months in Newport News, and we're hanging out in a room together talking about things that we're encountering and problems that we're having in local governments. And we also have speakers that will come in who are experts on particular activities, particular subject matters. We've had building officials come in and talk about what it's like to work with FEMA hazard mitigation grants for raising houses, stuff like that. You can, of course, provide your own manual review, which, power to you. Read the manual.
Good luck.
And then we have contact information for our Region 3 representative, Mari Radford, who has attended a lot of meetings in our area. She has really tried to be an advocate for our state. And then our new ISO specialist, who Shannon and I have spoken with, and who's a wonderful resource on the ISO program. And she has been very flexible in communicating with us about a lot of our concerns related to the program. So there's a lot of help that's available to your localities if you have a small staff or you're unsure about the CRS program in general. We're trying to really create a community for people to learn and understand and work in.
And another note about the working group, a lot of these folks attend. Mari often attends, Christina is trying to attend, Charles has been at every one, I think. And other DCR folks come. It's a great place to meet people who you will be working with because they're with the state or FEMA or ISO. It's also a great place to meet other folks that are in your similar situations and just talk with them about it. We also have a bi-monthly newsletter that we put out. So if you want to be put on that list, just send me an email. My card is also at the back of the room, and I'll get you on that list so that you can get that information. Yeah.
I'd just like to point out for the Emergency Management Institute, you got to look at that well in advance because a lot of the things we've wanted to take, we find out there's a prerequisite that you've got to take before you can get to that course. So.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
FEMA's website, Cora, EMI, and all of its trainings does provide a lot of background information. They have instructions for how to send in your application. It is more of a process, but it is run by FEMA. So.
But yeah, that's a good point. You may have to take another class before you can take the CRS class, or you have to be a certified floodplain manager.
Right.
You have to meet certain prerequisites. That's a good point. Also, classes fill up quickly because it's a really great opportunity. I mean, it's free for local governments except for that $125 meal ticket. And for Virginia, for anyone who has to drive there, it'll cost you less than $200. So it's free for anyone in this room. So
And
it is
where is this?
It's in Emmitsburg, Maryland, and it's for the whole country. Anyone can go.
It's east of Hagerstown.
It's
Oh,
near.
I know where that is. Yeah.
It's near Gettysburg.
Gotcha.
DCR also holds 2 trainings every year for the LT73, which is like the very basic intro course. Some people in this room actually just took it last week. And then at the end of that, you get to take the Certified Floodplain Manager exam. And then also, we're working with FEMA right now to figure out how to take the E278, which is the one at Emmitsburg that's all about CRS, and condense that into a day and still get some sort of certificate at the end of 8 hours from FEMA. So I'll keep you guys posted on that.
Great.
That's great.
Wetlands watching distributed, but right now that was proposed like Monday, so we're still trying to figure out
Oh wow.
what that means.
Great.
That brings up another good point, though. If there is interest from an area in one of these classes that the Emergency Management Institute offers, they will take it on the road. They'll bring it to you if there's enough interest in it. So that's another good thing.
Yeah, we got coastal construction twice last year for day-long seminars.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Charles. We're gonna now go quickly through an overview of our report, and then we're gonna take a break for just a few minutes to give you let this all soak in, and then we're gonna go over some more details on how to get credit for hazard mitigation planning. So the report that we're doing is due in early March. It's for local governments to quickly move through activities that they are likely already doing. They can see easily the basic credit, the basic requirements of each activity, so that they can see it is worth my time to meet that requirement, or it's not worth my time to meet that requirement. And the intention is to help local governments join the CRS or improve their ratings in the CRS. Ultimately, we want to see you preserve more open space and protect your wetlands. But regardless, if you're participating in the CRS, you are taking on activities that are adaptation to sea level rise. Good floodplain management is essentially sea level rise adaptation. So we want to encourage it for that reason. It also the CRS is becoming very popular because of those rate reforms in the National Flood Insurance Program. So there is more demand for it now. There are also lots of co-benefits. Another reason why we did this report is because we noticed, hey, you can get CRS credit for stormwater management regulations, and you can also meet those stormwater management regulations requirements. So some examples of co-benefits. Open space protection can be used to meet several required or voluntary programs, such as stormwater management. You might be interested in green infrastructure. Helps you meet TMDL goals. It helps you reduce your flood risk. You may create public access by preserving open space in the floodplain. It has recreational value, etc. There are several co-benefits to open space, and there are several co-benefits to all of the activities that we cover in this report. So we're trying to help you identify those activities that you're already doing for other reasons.
All right, so we do review the common activities, just reiterating that local governments probably already do. We want to kind of, drive that point home more. We're trying to make it easier for local governments, not make it more difficult. We review the credit opportunities for each activity. So this is each action that the local government does. We provide what is basically required for them to meet the CRS requirements, and then co-benefits. So basically, a local government staff member could look at a chart and say, there's no way we're going to meet that basic requirement. I'm going to move on and go to the next possible activity. So we want it to be fast moving, so a local government representative could sit down and really determine quickly what they could do for low-hanging fruit, just to start. It is not intended to replace the coordinator's manual. We really don't think that that's possible because there are so many nuances in the program, and so we want it to be used in tandem. And throughout the report, we actually offer page references for a particular program or activity that we're talking about, so you could go back and forth really easily.
And there's a lot more detail in the manual than what we put in our report. We did not set out to rewrite the manual, it's already written. So if there are more details, we direct you to the manual to understand those.
And we also talked about some activities that probably won't earn very much credit, if any, but we know local governments want to know about. So for example, the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Act. Seems like this would be something so obvious for local governments to get credit for because it requires a buffer along waterways. Well, as it turns out, because the way that the act is written in the Virginia Code, it's not an actual requirement to restrict development. And in order to get credit for open space preservation, one of the many CRS activities, you actually have to restrict development. And so unless your locality can prove that it's never given a permit to anything to be built in the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Area,
and it doesn't intend to ever give a permit,
then it won't count for credit. So this is unfortunately one program that we take pride in as Virginians, but it won't work for CRS. It's not compatible. But we want to talk about it because it should be. I mean, it makes sense that it would be. Similarly, the Dunes and Beaches Act, it seems obvious that beaches control waves and they absorb wave action, and so they should probably be some sort of floodplain protection creditable activity. But because of the way that the CRS Manual treats open space and erosion control, it's not probably going to be creditable. So it's a really high threshold to meet. So we want to talk about it and then say why it's hard and then move on. Because we know that there are things that people really want to know about in local governments, and we want to be sure that we address it, but also explain why. So if a constituent is in a meeting and asks your local government official, well, why the heck can't we get credit for X, Y, and Z, then you can easily say, boom, 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 we're so sorry.
Yes. And in the report, we'll highlight those activities that you would think would get credit, but won't. We'll also highlight activities that are easy to earn credit, that are hard, so those that would be hard to earn credit, and high credit activities. These are the overarching topics that are covered. These are land use planning, locality geographic information systems, floodplain protection programs, so that's primarily open space protection, stormwater management, community engagement, building codes, and structural mitigation and emergency management.
All right, we're just going to go through this really quickly. So underneath those larger topics, these are some activities that we talk about, some programs that your locality is going to enforce or going to encourage. So comprehensive plans are a big planning tool. We talk about the ways in which you can incorporate different policies and activities within your comprehensive plan to get CRS credit. I mentioned the preservation areas. There are lots of data layers. The CRS program loves mapping and geeky data, and so we talk about layers that get you extra credit and get you credits. We talk about land preservation and open space incentive programs. Land preservation in Virginia, there are a lot of different entities that actually do conservation easements, and so we talk about how those programs can be creditable. Similarly, wetland mitigation and protection banks, stream mitigation, we talk about these programs because, again, we know that they are popular in Virginia. Beach students and erosion, high watermark initiatives, that's part of the public outreach activity. We talked about individual building mitigation and how that works within the CRS, so individual residents elevating and other businesses elevating, etc. Natural stormwater solutions, so this is a lot of our open space, a lot of our floodplain management, drainage management, and then we talk about hazard mitigation plans, which is one of the things that we're going to talk about in more detail to you all after our break.
So let's take a break until 5 so really just a few minutes. And we'll be here if you have any questions right now. And when you come back, we'll talk about hazard mitigation.